Kelowna City Council voted to impose even stricter restrictions on short-term rentals than those being introduced by the provincial government, more or less eliminating things like Airbnb and short-term rentals with very few exceptions. It's a curious move for a city where one of the major industries is tourism, and for a Four Seasons playground where people from all over the world come to visit. There's no doubt that there's a housing affordability issue in Kelowna, as there is across Canada. But are these new rules really going to have a significant impact on the cost of housing? I'm Tyrell Boake, a realtor in Kelowna, and if you're new to the channel, I help you navigate the real estate market and provide you with useful information so you can make informed decisions that make sense for you. If you get anything out of today's video, hit that like button and remember to subscribe so that other people like you can see this video too. Before jumping into a news article that's going to explain what the City of Kelowna is choosing to do, let's just recap the key changes that the provincial government is introducing that come into effect on May 1st, 2024. The things that we need to point out that are the major changes from the provincial government in their new legislation on top of new regulation, new monitoring, new fines, and a provincial registry is that they want to limit short-term rentals in British Columbia to principal residences only, plus one additional unit on that property for BC municipalities with more than 10,000 people. And they want to remove all legal non-conforming rules being taken advantage of by investors. Essentially, the province is imposing a restriction that any short-term rental has to be in your primary residence. You have to live there, and it's either in the main home, in a secondary suite, or in an additional dwelling unit that's on the property. You will no longer be able to rent out an investment property or second home that you may own. The City of Kelowna, meanwhile, intends to impose additional restrictions on top of the provincial regulations. Let's take a look. Kelowna City Council approves sweeping restrictions on short-term rentals. Kelowna City Council has voted to eliminate most short-term rentals, such as those listed on Airbnb, across the city with some small exceptions. Council was asked by city staff to endorse sweeping changes to the city's short-term rentals bylaw, far exceeding restrictions being introduced by the province. Council heard the potential hardship from those utilizing short-term rentals as a way to afford making monthly mortgage payments during a recent public hearing, while also hearing from staff that short-term rentals are having an adverse effect on the city's long-term rental stock. Councillor Rick Weber told his colleagues that the decision for him came down to what would benefit the community as a whole and not individual landowners. Listening to the discussion today, the argument seems to be, will this get more people into homes or force a lot of people out of their homes, said Weber. Well, that's a hell of a question to answer, and there's no obvious answer to this. Weber sided with the majority, saying if the province's legislation and the city's restrictive bylaw works as intended, it will make more homes available for more people. Provincial legislation set to come into effect May 1st would allow short-term rentals in principal residences only. That's what we were talking about in the provincial restrictions where you could still rent it out in your primary residence. The city's changes approved Monday will eliminate short-term rentals across the city regardless of residential distinction, except 498 that have valid business licenses that will be grandfathered. Weber joined councillors Luke Stack and Mohini Singh and Mayor Tom Dias in endorsing those changes. It actually came down to that this vote only passed by a 4-3 margin. Stack, who had one of the loudest voices in favor of the changes, reminded council one of the main reasons they are looking at these sweeping changes is to protect the city's housing stock. We are suffering in this city with the need for long-term housing. I know many have said, I don't care what happens, I am never going back into long-term rental housing. Fine, they don't need to, said Stack. But if we pass this bylaw today, future investors in our city will be looking at bringing long-term housing. We can't change somebody who doesn't want to be a landlord, but there will be those who want to come into our city and make investments. While he agreed the city and the country are facing a housing affordability crisis, the bigger issue is the lack of new homes being built. This is a really valid point. They're acknowledging that we're not building houses fast enough, but instead of focusing on that, they're focusing on targeting short-term rental owners, which in this city I believe there's about 1,100. He says he supports the provincial legislation that would allow short-term rentals within principal residences and would suggest staff monitor the situation before moving ahead with even more restrictive bylaws. There's a little bit of a contradiction here. He's voting to allow the restriction that you can't rent out your secondary suite, but he's also saying that he can see the value in it, and going forward, they should monitor the situation and see what impact it's having. It was a tough decision, admitted Dias, the mayor, but initially, when we looked at the number of licenses we originally had outside of this principal residence, it was sitting at about 1,100 that we were aware of. We were also aware we had about 2,400 units being rented out. The bulk of those were within the towers and apartments. Those are outside the purview of what we decided today anyway. A little bit of a cop-out. He's saying that those 2,400 units in apartments and towers, those are the responsibility of the provincial government, and those are going away. So what he's saying is there are only 1,100 short-term rentals in Kelowna that are in secondary suites or in primary residences, and they're focusing on further restricting so that those 1,100 homeowners cannot be short-term rental owners anymore. Council also unanimously endorsed a motion to ask the province to exempt other specific properties such as those on Sunset Drive, Playa del Sol, and the Aqua development. If you're not familiar with those three areas of Kelowna, Sunset Drive is near downtown along the lake where there's some purpose-built short-term rental units there, as well as Playa del Sol in the Mission area, which is almost exclusively short-term rentals. Just to finish off the article, communities do have the ability to ask the province to opt out of its legislation if they have a vacancy rate above 3% for 2 consecutive years. However, the last time Kelowna's vacancy rate was above 3% was over a decade ago in 2012. So the gist of all of this is that on one hand, the provincial government is saying, hey, we don't want short-term rentals in towers and condos anymore, but you're more than welcome to have a short-term rental if it's in your primary residence in a secondary suite or an additional dwelling unit that's on your property. But on the other hand, the city of Kelowna is saying, hey, we don't care about those apartments and condos so much, but we are not going to allow you to have a short-term rental in your primary residence even. These new regulations are more or less going to eliminate short-term rentals in the city of Kelowna unless the provincial government grants the exceptions that the city is asking for those three key areas that they named in the article, which, in my opinion, is highly unlikely. Visitors to the city will be forced to either stay in a hotel or find other accommodation options when they come to the city for vacations, sporting events, concerts, or even if they have to come to the city for an extended stay at one of our local hospitals. And if you've looked at the price of a hotel lately, I think it's safe to say that this is going to change a lot of people's travel plans. Looking at it from another angle, in a city with nearly 250,000 people, is a one-time injection of 500 secondary suites, 1,000, 1,500, or even 2,000 new suites going to have a significant impact on the long-term housing affordability in the city? I have my own opinion about it, but I'd like to hear yours. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Is this going to have a significant long-term impact on prices? Or is this just a nothing sandwich that we're going to forget about in the not-too-distant future? And if you're one of the many homeowners that uses this extra income from your short-term rental to help pay for your mortgage, put food on the table for your family, and to provide an alternative to high-priced hotels for someone visiting the region, I'd like to know what you think about these proposed changes. Let me know in the comments down below. Or if you're one of the people that think this is a good idea and it's going to have a lasting impact on the housing market, I'd love to hear from you too. Drop me a line down below, and we'll see you next time.